All right, welcome to Publishing Power. My name is JoEllen, and I am here again today with Hayley Milliman from ProWritingAid. Hey, Hayley.
Hello, how are you?
I am great. I'm fantastic. And I am so excited that we have these monthly little talks here. We're just going into our tools and techniques to help all of our writers out there, be it fiction, nonfiction, research, academic, and just making sure that they can wordsmith and become stronger writers and be more aware of the intentional choices they're making. So again, all of you out there, please follow along, subscribe, and we'll get to this monthly or maybe more. You never know. Today, we're going to talk to Hayley. Hayley is the content lead for ProWritingAid, and she has been formerly a school teacher, and now she gets to focus on just words and how they work. She's writing on her own novel. So it's super, super fun stuff going on here. And I just want to thank you for coming, Hayley, and helping us through this again.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I know that we're going to talk about passive voice today. And I know
Yes.
some people say that is bad, but that's not really true. So let's just start with what is passive voice so that everyone understands what we're talking about.
Great question. So passive voice is basically when you set up your sentence so that the subject is hidden, right? The subject comes at the end. So if we think about typical sentence structure as, subject, verb, object, right? Jane opened present, right? That's your typical active voice structure where the subject, Jane, she comes at the beginning of the sentence. She's the one doing the opening. It's easy. It's clear. You understand it. Passive voice is when that order is reversed. So instead of the present coming at the end of the sentence, the object, it comes at the beginning. So if active voice is Jane opened the present, passive voice then is the present was opened by Jane.
Exactly.
So basically the subject, the person doing the action, is hidden at the end of the sentence rather than at the beginning of the sentence as we typically see in active voice structure. So that's kind of what passive voice is. And yeah, it's when you're hiding that, you're making it passive because again, the person who's doing the action is coming after the verb has already occurred.
Okay. As I said, some people think this is wrong. So let's just talk about why is this such a touchy subject with everyone when we're writing? And again, we want to look at it from not only the fiction, but also in general. Can you tell us?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a super touchy grammar subject. It was actually my high school English teacher was just so against passive voice. He used to just mark up our papers anytime we used it and be like, wrong. But the thing is, it's not technically wrong, right? So saying the present was opened by Jane is not grammatically incorrect. And I think that's the first reason why it's so touchy is because it's not technically incorrect. It is grammatically correct. But passive sentence constructions are typically more complicated and just harder for our readers to really understand. So taking that example I gave, the present was opened by Jane. If you close your eyes and picture a sentence as a movie, when you're saying that, right, if you say the present, if we read it really slowly, right, the present, that would pop into your head first, the present, but there's nobody opening it, right? So Jane, the person doing the action, wouldn't pop into your mind until the end of the sentence. So in that very simple construction, it's not going to really get in your way of understanding. But when you have longer and more complicated sentences that are constructed with passive voice, oftentimes questions, who is doing this? What are they doing? Are harder to answer because all that important information comes at the end, right? So when we're thinking about constructing sentences with our readers in mind, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand things. And when you hide important information about who's doing something at the very end of the sentence, that movie is muddled in their head, right? And again, in a very simple sentence, it doesn't matter too much. But again, it becomes more complicated the more complicated a sentence is. And I think for a lot of people, again, it's just this issue of, are we making our sentences overly wordy? Are we making them overly complicated? And again, are we hiding that important information that our readers need behind this overly awkward sentence structure?
Right. And I think, especially if you know another language, that when people move things around and I can't go subject or object, that it really messes up your brain because trying to clarify and suddenly, especially where the present. Well, I'm thinking the present as in the present, but it could be the present as in the present, past, future.
Yes.
And the present was opened. Oh, crap.
Yeah. You're like trying to like
a portal
sort through.
Or was
exactly.
it?
Yes.
What happened there?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's just providing that context that people need. And again, it doesn't mean that every sentence has to be subject, verb,
No.
object, but giving that important information is what really helps people to understand what you're actually trying to say and to not get muddled kind of message. Yeah.
And I also like to mention that we're in research and academic work, that it is very, very helpful to do that subject, verb, object,
Yes.
because when you move them around, it can be interpreted. And the last thing you want with a research or any kind of factual information, you want to make sure that the facts are easily, and they're not interpreted.
Yep,
they are easily understood, but
Yep.
it's all been done on their behalf. So again, those are very important things to look at it. So when is it technically incorrect, when we've got them mixed around, or how's that? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. So in typical word processor, your Microsoft Word, it's not going to flag it for you because it's not technically incorrect. Yeah, which is why using a tool like ProWritingAid is so helpful, because ProWritingAid will come in and flag instances where you've used passive voice, and working with an editor will do that as well, because these are the points that can really affect your writing, right? So it's really important to know where you've used them, because you need to fix them, because like you said, they get in the way of understanding. So it's challenging because, again, if you just put your paper through Word, it's not going to flag these because it's not technically incorrect, but it does really impede and get in the way of understanding. So this is something that you should highly prioritize when you're working with an editing technology like ProWritingAid, or with an edit or self-editing your own writing, to try to find these places, because again, it might not be technically incorrect, but it's clunky, it's awkward for your readers, and it can really, again, get in the way of their understanding.
Right. And I think it's very important that we take a look at this again and again and again, because it's all about self-editing, and it's just the more you learn, and I'm not proposing that everybody goes out and gets this a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
The easier that you learn passively by using tools, by having checkpoints. We've been going through different things, fiction, having the story elements, so you can tick through them, and then you automatically have this pilot's checklist of, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. Or if you know your weaknesses, then you become, over the year or years, much stronger in your writing, and it allows you to then make conscious choices of what's best for you and what you're trying to convey at this time, versus just working so hard to get everything there and then not knowing what's the best. And again, if you know this, then you're going to get the best for your money out of an editor, which is what you really want to do, because it's
exactly,
it's an investment. So when is it going to be okay to use this passive voice? Because we know it's okay. It's not incorrect.
And so we've talked in previous sessions about being intentional, right? So because this is not grammatically incorrect, there might be instances where you want to use passive voice, and that's okay, but you need to be intentional about using them in effective instances, right? So some common ones are, first, if you're trying to be mysterious about your subject, right? So newspapers actually do this a lot, right? If you think about headlines where they're trying to get people to click, where, for instance, like woman murdered in her home is technically passive voice, because you don't know by who. And so that is a technique that people will use, because they're like, oh, I want to click and read more about this, right? So, which is horrible. Yeah, which is horrible. But when you start to think about that, you start to notice it everywhere, because you're like, oh, they're purposely hiding this for me. They're trying to trick me to click in. But that might be a technique if you're writing for news or web or something like that, where you're trying to get clicks. Sometimes you want to hide the who and the what in your article to get people to click. So that might be a time when you want to use it. Similarly, if you're writing mystery, or you're writing something where your subject is not aware of what's happening. So say something horrible, this is all like horror, but say something mysterious was left on the doorstep, right? And your narrator doesn't know by whom. The package was left on the doorstep earlier, and you don't know who, right? That is okay. It's okay to use passive voice in that instance, because again, your narrator doesn't know, right? So if you're trying to hide that subject, you can use passive voice. Another instance is when it doesn't matter. So sometimes this will happen in the subject doesn't matter as much. So if you're thinking about, say you're writing about a paper about New York in, I don't know, the early 20th century, and you're saying something like the Empire State Building was constructed in 1918 or whatever it was. In that instance, it doesn't really matter by who. We know it obviously didn't construct itself, so it was constructed by somebody else, but it's not really pertinent to the meaning of the sentence or to the overall point. In that instance, it's fine to use passive voice because, again, who was doing it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really get in the way of people's understanding. And I think to your point before about the object in that is really clear, like the Empire State Building was constructed. It's very obvious what it is. And so knowing who does it doesn't really get in our way of understanding what happened. So in that instance, it's fine to use it because, again, our meaning is clear. So when you're going through and you're checking and finding instances of passive voice, or you're using something ProWritingAid and it's identifying passive voice for you, you want to ask yourself, okay, does it matter what my subject is? Will my reader understand this even if I keep it in this construction? And if so, okay, that's fine. But again, be intentional about when you're using it to make sure that it's not going to get in the way of your reader's understanding. And also that it's just not super, super clunky, right? So a lot of times passive voice can be clunky. Even if we go back to that simple sentence, the present was opened by Jane, that's way clunkier and more formal and stilted than Jane opens the present, right? So just think about, is this A, getting in the way of my reader's understanding, B, getting in the way of their enjoyment, right? So can they understand my sentence? And B, are they going to look at this and be like, oh, this is really slog to read through? And if so, then it's time to fix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then let's, I always try to make sure that we give them something to walk away with. So on this one, how do we fix our passive voice?
Tip of the day. So first, I think it would be to identify it. So the word by is a good little indicator that you've used passive voice. So the present was opened by Jane. The Empire State Building was built by whoever. Woman murdered in her home by whoever. So if to understand the sentence, you need that word by plus a noun, then it's a good indication that you've used passive voice. It's not always, I'd say like 80% or probably higher of the time, having that by whoever is a good indication.
Passive use was used by me.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Instead of I used passive voice. No, you didn't.
Exactly. Yes. And see, that first example was so clunky. I was like, passive, where's she going with this? Passive voice is used. That's the whole problem with passive voice. Like it just gets too long and unnecessary. So first, look for places where you've used the word by, if you're not using something like ProWritingAid that can help just find it for you. The second is basically to flop your sentence around. So in passive voice, the subject is at the end, and we again want to put that subject back to the beginning. So the present was opened by Jane. Jane is the one doing something. She's the one opening. So we've got to move her back to the beginning of the sentence. Jane opened the present. So typically, again, in passive voice, your subject is at the end. They're kind of hidden behind that word by. So we want to flop them back so that they're the one doing the action. So Jane opened the present. I used passive voice instead of the passive voice was used by me, right? So moving that subject up to the beginning, you can check again and you can read your sentence back to yourself and say, oh, does it make sense without the word by now? Is it clear who's doing what? And great.
And you can just do a find, replace, or not replace, but a find.
Find.
Search, and then you can easily do that. So again, put it on your little list. It's fun to do that. But again, using a tool, we all use tools. Professional editors, we use tools, and the tool we use is ProWritingAid because it makes our life easier so we can go through. And the less we see marked up by this tool, the more then we get to dig in and think ourselves. But if we're just using the tool, then easy peasy, but we're not going to get near as much time to dig in the same way. And so I really think this is part of that good self-editing. Use the tool, come to us, make your editor earn
what they're doing.
Earn their place in your book. And I think everyone benefits and it really helps. So again, that's really, really great. I hope everyone is following along. We have self-editing school together on ProWritingAid. And of course, whenever you're ready, or if you give up on any of these things, you can always just click through the human editors and we'll be there to help you. So no problem there. Again, thank you for joining us. Everyone subscribe, follow along, check out the links below, and we hope this has been helpful. Thank you.
All right, bye.